Few films carry the reputation for provocation that surrounds Visitor Q, directed by Miike Takashi. Since its release in 2001, the film has often been discussed primarily in terms of its shock value. Scenes involving incest, prostitution, domestic abuse, and grotesque bodily humour have led many viewers to treat the film as a piece of pure transgression, an exercise in pushing audiences as far as possible. Yet, reducing Visitor Q to its most outrageous moments misses what the film is actually doing. Beneath its deliberately confrontational surface, the film is deeply interested in the breakdown and reconstruction of the family. The shocking imagery is not simply there to provoke, it works as a way of exposing the emotional repression that has already destroyed the Yamazaki household long before the mysterious visitor arrives. At the centre of the film is a family that appears, at least superficially, to resemble a typical middle-class household. Very quickly, however, Miike reveals that the structure of this family is almost entirely hollow. Each member of the household occupies a familiar social role, yet none of them are capable of fulfilling the emotional responsibilities that role requires. The father, once a television journalist, has become a deeply passive figure whose main interest is filming youth violence for a sensationalist television programme that may never happen. Rather than addressing the chaos unfolding inside his own home, he points his camera outwards, documenting social problems while remaining blind to the dysfunction surrounding him. The son expresses his frustration and alienation through acts of cruelty towards his mother. His behaviour represents a complete breakdown of the traditional family hierarchy. Instead of authority flowing from parent to child, the son dominates the household through violence and humiliation. The home, which should function as a place of safety, becomes a space where cruelty is routine and largely ignored. The daughter, meanwhile, secretly works as a sex worker. In many ways, her situation captures the emotional emptiness of the family most clearly. In a household where genuine intimacy no longer exists, intimacy becomes something that must be bought and sold. Her double life reflects a family structure where connection has collapsed to the point that even basic affection has become transactional. The mother occupies the most tragic position within the household. After enduring repeated abuse and humiliation, she has retreated into emotional passivity. Rather than acting as the centre of the family, she's become its most vulnerable figure. Her silence illustrates the extent to which the family dynamic has broken down. What should be a supportive network of relationships has turned into a system built around indifference and cruelty. By the time the film introduces the mysterious visitor, the Yamazaki household is already in ruins. The structure of the family is still physically present, the house, the roles, the routines, but the emotional foundation that once held it together has disappeared. In many ways, the visitor does not destroy the family so much as reveal how completely it has already collapsed. The arrival of this outsider immediately brings to mind the narrative structure of Teorema by Pier Paolo Pasolini. In Pasolini's film, a mysterious visitor arrives at a bourgeois home and forms intimate relationships with each member of the family. His presence gradually exposes the spiritual emptiness underlying their comfortable middle-class existence. Once the visitor leaves, each character experiences a profound personal crisis, forcing them to confront the artificial stability of the lives they had previously taken for granted. Visitor Q follows a surprisingly similar structure. The visitor functions as a catalyst whose presence disrupts the fragile stability of the Yamazaki household. However, where Pasolini's film presents the disruption in spiritual and allegorical terms, Miike pushes the idea to far more extreme territory. The characters in Teorema experience quite existential crisis. The characters in Visitor Q explode. Emotional repression does not lead to contemplation, but to chaotic outbursts that force the family's buried tensions into the open. In this sense, Miike seems to take Pasolini's basic premise and push it further, replacing spiritual revelation with something far more grotesque and physical. The transformations experienced by the characters are not philosophical, but visceral. Instead of reflecting on their lives, they are forced into confrontations that make it impossible to continue pretending that the family still functions normally. The difference becomes especially clear in how each film portrays the transformation of individual family members. In Teorema, each character responds to the visitor in a way that reflects Pasolini's broader critique of the bourgeois society. Their crises are contemplative and symbolic. In Visitor Q, transformations happen through emotional eruption, violence, absurdity, and dark humour replace the quiet introspection that defines Pasolini's film. What Miike exposes is not spiritual emptiness so much as emotional repression. The visitor becomes less a mystical figure and more a catalyst that forces hidden tensions to the surface. A crucial part of how the film communicates this chaos lies in its visual style. Visitor Q was shot largely on digital video, and Miike makes no attempts to hide the roughness of that format. The image is grainy, it's flat, and it's often overexposed. Instead of the polished look associated with mainstream cinema, the film often resembles amateur footage or home video recordings. This aesthetic choice has an important effect on how the viewer experiences the film. The digital video format creates a sense of immediacy that makes events on screen feel uncomfortably real. The audience is not watching a carefully staged cinematic spectacle, but something that feels closer to the private moments captured on camera. The domestic setting, combined with the raw visual texture, gives the impression that we are witnessing events that were never meant to be seen. In this respect, the film evokes the unsettling realism of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. That film also relies on a stripped down visual style that blurs the line between fiction and observation. The violence in Henry feels disturbing partly because it's presented so plainly, without the stylisation that usually accompanies cinematic violence. However, while Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, uses the realism to create a suffocating atmosphere of brutality, Visitor Q produces a very different emotional effect. The rough digital video imagery amplifies not only the film's violence, but also its absurdity and humour. Instead of feeling relentlessly bleak, the film often feels chaotic and unpredictable, although the viewer is watching a family unravel in real time. Another important element of this film is its dark sense of humour. Much of Visitor Q's reputation comes from the extremity of its imagery, but Miike frequently pushes these moments so far beyond realism that they become absurd. The violence, sexual taboos and grotesque situations are exaggerated to such a degree that the shock gradually transforms into something strangely funny. Instead of remaining purely disturbing, the film often crosses into a kind of surreal comedy. This shifting tone is a key part of how the film works. Miike constantly moves between horror, satire and dark comedy, often within the same scene. Moments that initially appear shocking can suddenly become absurd, while moments that feel comedic can quickly turn disturbing again. These tonal shifts present the film for settling into a single emotional register. Instead, they reinforce the sense that the family's world is unstable and unpredictable. This dynamic is particularly clear in the infamous milking scene. What begins as a moment that appears designed purely for provocation is pushed so far that it becomes almost surreal. The scene's exaggerated physicality and awkward sincerity transform it from something shocking into something darkly comic. At the same time, it restores the mother to a nurturing position within the family, turning an apparent grotesque moment into a strange form of reconciliation. From a psychological perspective, these moments can be understood as a form of catharsis. Throughout the film, each member of the family suppresses frustration, resentment, or emotional pain. The shocking events that unfold represent the moment where the repression finally breaks down. By pushing these eruptions to grotesque extremes, Miike forces both the characters and the audience to confront emotions that have been buried beneath the surface of everyday family life. By the final section of the film, the chaos that once defined the household begins to take on a different meaning. The family has not become normal or stable in any conventional sense, yet something important has shifted. The characters are no longer hiding behind the silence and denial that once defined their relationships. What the visitor ultimately accomplishes is not the destruction of the family, but the collapse of the illusion that the family was functioning in the first place. Once that illusion disappears, the characters are forced to interact with one another more honestly, even if that honesty is messy and unpredictable. This is where Visitor Q becomes far more optimistic than its reputation suggests. The film does not represent family life as something stable or harmonious. Instead, it suggests that genuine connection can only emerge once repression and denial have been stripped away. Like the stark realism of Henry's portrait of a serial killer and the destructive outsider in Teorema, Visitor Q forces its characters to confront uncomfortable truths about their lives. Miike ultimately takes Pasolini's premise even further. In Visitor Q, the visitor does not simply reveal the emptiness of bourgeois life, he pushes the family to a point where repression collapses entirely. Out of that collapse emerges something unexpected, the possibility that even the most dysfunctional family can begin to rebuild itself, once it finally stops pretending everything is normal.